All right, so we're now live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Commander Office Hours. Today's Office Hours is all about Sencha XJS 101, building apps for multiple platforms. We're very excited to have Art K from Sencha here with us today.
Hello. How are you, Whiting?
Hi. So Art is going to introduce the XJS framework and discuss how it differs from other JavaScript toolkits like AngularJS, and we'll answer any questions that we may have about Sencha. Art, let's get started.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Whiting, for the introduction. Again, this is building apps for multiple platforms with XJS 5. My name is Art. I am the Developer Relations Manager at Sencha. And if you're curious to learn more about me, you can visit my website at akawebdesign.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at ArthurAK. But since we're not here to talk about me, we're here to talk about the XJS framework. And today is actually a great day to talk about this because we just released XJS 5.1 this morning. So I would encourage you to visit our website, sencha.com/products/XJS, where you can download our free trial. The free trial includes all of our source code, so there's nothing that we hold back. So give that a shot, and certainly along the way, as you get questions, I think Whiting will be reading them out at the end. So I look forward to hearing some of those. The presentation today is going to be pretty straightforward. I'm going to give you a high-level view of Sencha as a company. We're going to dive into the XJS framework, and at the end we'll have time for some Q&A, and I'll give you some links to some other resources. So we're going to have probably half the time scheduled today for going through some slides. I'll try to keep them interesting, and then certainly a lot of time in live demo and Q&A. So let me start by giving you all a 30,000-foot view of Sencha as a company. Sencha's been around since 2007. We are venture capital funded by the fantastic partners that you see on the slide right here. And we're excited to work with these companies because they really share our vision for making powerful applications using web technology. Now, Sencha's been around since 2007, and with the numbers on the screen, I think you can see that we've gotten a lot of traction in the industry over the years. Now, we may not be the newest or the most exciting technology on the front page of Reddit, but ultimately our customers have realized that Sencha helps them consistently deliver incredible web applications without the need to reinvent the wheel every 2 years. To that point, 60% of the Fortune 100 use our products. And I believe this goes to show that the biggest companies rely on us to get the job done because we not only provide great products, but we also stand behind those products with world-class training, support, and professional services. So you can see some of the brands here on the screen, and you know, they've stuck with us over the years. When you look at the Sencha platform, what you'll see is a product line that is completely revolving around web technology. And I'm not going to go into each of the products today. Obviously, we're here to talk about the XJS framework. But what you'll notice about our product portfolio is that it helps you to design, develop, and deploy your web applications. Now, with respect to XJS, this has really been our flagship JavaScript framework, as I said, since 2007 when it was first released. And over the years, the framework has evolved quite a bit. And you think back to the early and mid-2000s, for those of you who've been doing web development for that long. And our framework was pretty revolutionary at the time. Frameworks or libraries like Prototype only came out in 2005, and jQuery was released for the first time in 2006. So we were still pretty early on in the game. And since then, the web development landscape has changed quite a bit. So you think back that far, and in the early and mid 2000s, everybody was doing Flash development, and that technology has all but died since then. The XJS framework and Sencha as a company, we've been around since well before iOS and Android existed, and yet our customers still want to build HTML applications. I think that speaks to how powerful not only our platform is, but the web in general. And we believe that the XJS framework only continues to evolve and become better as we respond to our customers' needs. So when we released XJS 5 for the first time back in May, and as I said, XJS 5.1 shipped this morning, we had a certain set of business goals that we wanted to tackle for the framework. And I say this because we work directly with our customers and our community to provide the tools that make them most effective. So things like creating apps across multiple devices was a big goal for us with the XJS 5 framework. Many companies that are building web applications typically start by building apps for the desktop. But as tablets and mobile devices are becoming more prevalent, clearly they want to take those applications onto their mobile devices, and yet that's far more difficult than it actually sounds. We also wanted to focus on increasing the developer productivity within our customers, and we do that via the object-oriented approach to building applications, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. And what that refers to is you don't want to have to rewrite significant parts of your application transition into the future is very smooth. So let's talk about XJS as a framework and help you understand how it's different than some of the other options that you are probably familiar with in the web development landscape. And so I know that all of us are online right now, but if we were in the same room, maybe at a conference or a meetup, and if I asked all of you to raise your hands if you were familiar with AngularJS or had used it, I'm willing to bet the vast majority of you would say yes. It's incredibly popular, and it's a great piece of technology. But it's very different in its approach to building applications than the XJS framework. The XJS framework is really an enterprise comprehensive widget framework in that we provide the vast majority of functionality that our customers need to build successful applications. The XJS framework provides a really scalable application architecture in both MVC and MVVM, and we support the widest array of browsers of any JavaScript library that I'm aware of. Finally, we offer fully customizable themes so that you can brand the application very quickly and easily to your organization's requirements. Now, that's different than the AngularJS approach to building apps, and this is also true of other libraries out there in the open source world. I'm not trying to pick on AngularJS, and honestly, I believe Angular is a great piece of technology. But when you view their website and you see how they describe themselves, they brand themselves as the library on which you build your own framework. And they expect you to assemble the functionality as you begin building that framework and then begin building your own application. And there's nothing wrong with that approach. It's just something that you have to realize that they don't come out of the box with a bunch of widgets. Very often you either need to cobble together that functionality from third-party libraries or you need to build it yourself. And maybe that's something that you want to be responsible for, maybe you don't, but it's a key difference between the approach in AngularJS and the approach in XJS. Finally, AngularJS, as well as many of the other libraries that are out there today, are built as modern browser only. And this is an important topic that I'll come back to in just a moment. Finally, Angular doesn't have any built-in themes, partly because they don't have all the widgets built into the library. It's just sort of bare bones core functionality, and all of the theming and branding is then left as an exercise to you. So when we actually look at the details of building an AngularJS application, this is code that probably looks very familiar to many of you, in that you're writing a lot of HTML code by hand, and maybe you're using things like directives or other features of the AngularJS library to then template and compile the actual DOM elements that get read by the browser. XJS takes a very different approach to building applications. In the Sencha ecosystem, you actually write very little HTML by hand. Most of your day-to-day development is done exclusively in JavaScript, in that we focus on delivering components and widgets within a single-page application. So as you can see by the code sample, you fire up an XJS application. Perhaps you include various views, controllers, and other sorts of functionality, and then you scale the application from there. So I mentioned a moment ago the idea of browser support being a key differentiator between AngularJS and the XJS framework. And when you look at the browsers that the XJS framework supports, we include a lot of legacy browsers because that's what our customers have come to expect. Many organizations can't expect their users to be running the latest and greatest browsers on either desktop or mobile. And so we've decided that we are going to support older versions of Safari, Firefox, and IE, but also support all of the latest versions and go into the various mobile browsers. Now, in the AngularJS world, version 1.3, I believe, is the latest version of Angular, and they've already dropped support for IE8. When you look at their roadmap for Angular 2.0, they've decided they're going to drop support for even IE9, possibly IE10, depending on when it is released. So that's a key differentiator to think about when building an application on a particular technology. Because applications are expected to stay in production for such a long time, it's key to think about that the browsers that are considered modern today will end up being the legacy browsers of tomorrow, and you want to make sure that the technology that you choose is committed to supporting those older versions. Just to sort of illustrate this point, when we look at the worldwide market share for desktop browsers, we can see that Internet Explorer still has a stranglehold on the day-to-day usage on the internet. And in particular, when you look at the versions of IE, even though IE 10 and 11 are making a significant impact over the last 6 or 12 months, IE 8 and 9 are holding pretty steady in terms of their usage. So again, it's just important to think about using a technology that's committed to supporting older versions of the various browsers. At this point, I'd like to dive into the actual new features for the XJS framework, because I think these are easily the most exciting things to talk about today. So you can see some of the items here on the screen, and I'd like to go into each of these in a bit more detail before we start diving into some live coding. One of the first things that we wanted to set out and do with XJS 5 was to enable tablet support and support for mobile devices using the existing code for an XJS application. And I say this because as our customers are starting to utilize tablets and mobile devices more and more, we find that even though responsive design is a key point to put into an application, that the actual functionality between desktop and mobile can be very, very different. And so just taking a desktop application that's intended to be used with a mouse and a keyboard, and slapping that onto a tablet gives you less than stellar results, as you might expect. So we were committed to adding tablet support in a way that offered minimal effort in moving your applications onto a mobile device. One of the ways we tackled that was by adding 2 additional themes to the XJS theming offering. So the XJS framework, as I mentioned, has themes that ship with the framework, and in fact, we now offer 10 different themes. The 2 that you see on the screen here are brand new to XJS 5. They're called Crisp and Neptune Touch, and all of these themes are built with CSS3 and Sass under the hood. So these themes in particular enable the migration of desktop apps onto mobile devices by using enlarged element sizes to support a wider contact area, so that as you're tapping and swiping, your fingers have just more surface area on which to interact with the application. We also map a variety of those touch events between either taps and pinches and zooms to their desktop equivalents where possible, so that you don't have to duplicate that functionality specifically for mobile. Now, I also touched on responsive design a second ago, and this is also something else that's new to the XJS framework. So we created this thing called the responsive configuration property, so that not only does the application change its display as the browser is resized or the orientation is changed, but you can configure all sorts of other functionality dependent upon the responsiveness of the application. So as an example, when you're configuring one of your views in the application, you can say that based upon either its orientation for landscape versus portrait, you can change where on the screen something's rendered, or perhaps more along the lines of like a CSS3 media query, you can say if if an area is either wider or smaller than something configured, you can change actual behavior, not just the display of that part of the application. And I think this is very powerful. One other item that we worked very hard on with response to mobile devices was making sure that our charting package could support touch-based gestures. So all of the charts that ship with the XJS framework enable pan and zoom, tapping, a variety of other both desktop and touch interactivity for those charts. And much like all of the other widgets in our framework, the XJS framework ships with over 100 different widgets, and each one of them is completely extendable and customizable, so that if you need custom functionality in either a chart or a different widget, it's very easy to add that functionality rather than digging through lots and lots of customized HTML and CSS. For those of you not familiar with the XJS framework, historically our most popular widget is the grid, because we've spent a considerable amount of time trying to optimize our grid for performance across all browsers. And particularly in enterprise applications, there isn't really a better way to display data than with a grid. And very often we see customers who require thousands, if not tens of thousands of rows in the grid widget. And in most JavaScript libraries, that can be a painful experience, especially on older browsers. But the XJS grid is optimized to handle that. In XJS 5, we added these things called grid widgets, which are essentially either visualizations or form fields, other widgets that can be embedded directly within a grid row. And of course, their data updates live as the underlying data is updated. So this is a really cool feature for XJS5, and when we look at our online examples in a moment, I'll point out where you can play with this online and actually see the source code. We also added two-way data binding in XJS5, as well as support for MVVM architecture. Now, in prior versions of XJS, we did support MVC, but knowing how other frameworks, namely AngularJS, have made two-way data binding so popular, our customers demanded that we also add that same functionality, and so we've come and implemented that. But we've also gone a step further in that because XJS is a comprehensive widget library, the two-way data binding can be utilized across the entire framework. It's not just bound between your HTML template and the backing scope that you've defined. You can use two-way data binding across all of our widgets, and in other frameworks that would simply be something you had to implement yourself, if only because they aren't comprehensive frameworks. So this is a tremendous value add for XJS5. And finally, URL routing was the other major feature addition to the XJS5 framework, in that now you can have stateful applications based upon the URL routes. They enable deep linking inside of an application. And this was actually around in the Sencha Touch framework for a few years, but now that we've moved XJS5 to support mobile devices, we added this feature as well. So at this point, I think I've given you enough slides. Hopefully I haven't bored any of you to tears, but I'm willing to bet most of you are excited to see the actual code and start to explore day-to-day development in the XJS framework. So let's jump into a live demo. And what I'm going to do is first show you a basic Hello World application, just so that you can wrap your head around the initial nuts and bolts of what application development looks like. And then we're going to utilize Sencha Command, which is our command line suite of utilities, to actually generate a starter application, and then I'll jump into an application that is a bit more to it, so that you can get a much more clear idea of what a fully featured application might look like. So jump out of my slides and jump into my IDE. So what we're going to see here is a very simple HTML page, which you can see I'm including the XJS framework. I've got a theme that I'm including. I'm including the entire framework just for the purposes of demo. And then this particular theme also requires a bit of added functionality, so I've added a second JavaScript file there as well. So these 3 bits right here are just the framework, and then I've added just a vanilla app.js file for us to do some development. You'll notice that the rest of this file literally has no other HTML. Inside my body tags, there's nothing that we need to add. So as I said earlier, very, very different approach than building apps with either jQuery or AngularJS or many other popular frameworks. So the key here is to jump into app.js. And in this example, I am creating an ext on ready block that will run once the web page has finished loading. This is very similar to what you might do in jQuery or other frameworks. And then once the HTML page is physically ready, we can begin to create widgets and then render them to the screen. So this is a really bare bones example. We're going to create a widget. This is titled EXTPanel. That's the name of the class. You can see that we're going to render it to just the body of the web page. I've given it a height and some width, a little bit of other configuration bits like a title, and And then in this case, I'm going to input some raw HTML into a widget. This probably isn't something you would normally do, but again, just for the purposes of demoing this. I'll jump into my browser, and just to refresh here, here we go. You can see that I have an XJS panel. My title has a blue background per the theme that we've included. And then the raw HTML goes inside of the rest of the body for that panel. This is really pretty straightforward, nothing too complicated. And if you're curious, this is actually following our Hello World example in the XJS online documentation, which is something I would encourage you to check out when you have the time. You just go to docs.sencha.com and you click on the XJS framework, and it brings you into our online documentation, where here you see a variety of guides. This includes everything from getting started to more detailed core concepts, guides on application architecture, the individual components using Sencha Command, and a variety of other things. The actual API documentation is also linked here. And once this loads, perhaps I search for the panel class, which is what I just showed you. And from here, you see what our API documentation looks like. You get a really good explanation of what a panel is. And then we can start to actually play with examples and do a live preview right from our docs. We display all of the configuration options for every widget, what other properties or methods or events that you may need to know. And then finally, all of the Sass variables and mixins for fully customizing these widgets within the themes. So let's create a much more interesting example, something that you may use more in the real world than just a really simple Hello World app. And to do that, I'm going to open my terminal, because I want to use Sencha Command to help scale an application for me. And what we're going to do is we're going to run a command called Sencha link to one of my SDKs that I have locally. So the idea would be that I would have downloaded the XJS5 framework, and in this case I'll use the 501 GPL version. And then we say generate app. So we want to generate a starter application, and then we give it a name. So perhaps I call this CodeMentor, and then I tell it where I want it to output the starter application. And in this case, maybe I want to stick it into a file called CodeMentor demo. And so this will auto-generate a starter application that comes complete with an example of MVVM architecture, as well as all the necessary bindings for our build process. While this is generating, this will take just a second, let me jump back into my slides for a moment and introduce you to Sencha Command. Sencha Command, as I said, is our suite of command line tools that includes a variety of features, not all of which I have the time to go into, but we help to optimize your application builds so that you don't include the entire framework, and you don't include all of the custom code that you've written unless your application requires it. And so this helps save a tremendous amount of weight as the HTML page physically downloads all of your source code. We also integrate with Cordova and PhoneGap so that you can natively package your application and deploy that directly onto either an iPad or the latest Android tablet. And there's a wide variety of other features, like I said. So our application finished generating, and if we jump back into my IDE, close these two files, we'll see that I now have a CodeMentor demo folder inside of which I have all of this auto-generated code. So the first thing I want to show you is the way in which an application gets started. And so we start in the app.js file where you get an ext application call. And this doesn't physically do much, except it tells us it's going to auto-create a viewport for our application. That corresponds to this class right here, codementor.view.main.main. So if we were to physically look inside the app folder and do app view main, you can see that this class, codementor.view.main.main, is neatly packed into a consistent application architecture on the file system. We can see that it extends a widget that already exists in the framework. It requires a few other classes. And then we get into the actual configuration of this class. But before I dive into the code, I'm going to do one other thing through Sencha command, which is called Sencha Web Start. So another feature of Sencha command is that I can automatically, first, step into the directory. One of the other things Sencha command does is to provide you with a local web server. So I can simply type Sencha Web Start. It'll fire up a web server on localhost port 1841. So I can just copy this back into my browser. Looks like I already had this loaded. And here we can see the starter application. Again, this is nothing really all that exciting, but we can see we've got one panel over here with a button that I can click on. Something happens when I click on the button. And over here we have a tab panel inside of which is a little bit of content. So again, not a terribly detailed application, but the important thing here is that it has auto-generated my application architecture for us. And so this particular container uses a border layout, which means that things are either divided into regions, like the west region. So this panel is in the west region over here. And then we have our tab panel in the center region, which is right over here. Now, as I mentioned, the starter application also comes pre-built with an example of model view model for MVVM architecture. And we can see that defined here, where we see the controller for this particular class is called main. That corresponds to the main controller here. And the view model, again, type main, is defined here in the main model. So if I actually look up what these are, you can see that in the case of the view model, we're defining some data. And this data might be defined dynamically in a real-world application. But then this name gets utilized in the view right here, where we are binding the title for this panel to the underlying data. So you can look in the browser, you see Code Mentors is the title, and that was bound from here. I could say Code Mentor Demo. And refresh the application, and you can see that that's updated. Of course, with two-way data binding, I could update that on the fly. And for our view controller, you can see here that this is where we define the functionality for various event handlers contained within this particular view. So in this case, we have an on-click button event, or sorry, an on-click button method that from our view, we can see that we defined a button that had a handler for on-click button. So then that gets mapped automatically into our view controller. So that's just a starter application built with XJS and Sencha command. Let me actually show you an example with a bit more nuts and bolts to it so that you can get a better feel for using framework day to day. We jump into another directory I called Hello World Grid. Again, I'll fire up my web server. Before I show you the code, I'll just refresh the app so that you can see what I've done. This looks very similar to the starter application because all I've done is swap out the widget here in the center region for a grid. Again, I said earlier, the grid is our most popular widget. It's got a lot of built-in functionality. And I just popped that on top of the existing starter app. So here you see our XJS grid. And inside of the grid, I have a series of cars with their makes and models. And built into the grid is the ability to sort the grid, turn columns on or off on the fly. Believe I can rearrange columns on the fly. So there's a lot of functionality that comes out of the box without me having to do anything. So to prove that, let me dive into the code and show you what this looks like. I open up my Hello World Grid application, and again, I start at the app.js file. All this tells me is that it auto-creates my viewport at my main view. But one other thing I didn't point out before is that this is actually extending another class so that as the application gets fired up, it is telling the XJS framework to inherit some functionality. So where I find that is my application.js file. So under app, and all of my application resources live under the app folder. I open up application.js, and in here I can see that I'm loading maybe some data stores, or I want something to happen specifically when the application launches. So having said that, let's actually explore what the data looks like before I show you the code that is configuring the grid in our view. So as you might expect with a nicely architected file system, under the app we have a folder for model, a folder for view. In our case, we have this concept called a store, which is essentially a data collection. And if I open up the cars class, so hello world.store.cars, we'll notice that I'm requiring a model, and so we'll get to this model in a second. But the data store, as I said, is a collection that defines where the data comes from and then how that data is read into the application. So we can see that I'm telling the data store that every record in the store will be of the type car. And I define a proxy to tell the store where to get its data. So in this case, I'm saying I want an AJAX proxy that is just loading data from a local JSON file. So what's interesting here is that the XJS framework has a number of different types of proxies. So we have a local storage proxy to pull data out of your browser's local storage. We have a REST proxy if you're connecting to a REST backend. We have a JSON-P proxy if you're requesting data across domains. And the only thing you need to do there is to then tell the data store what type of proxy it is, and then perhaps change a few configuration options specific to that proxy. Finally, then, we need to tell the proxy what to do with the data once it has been loaded. So in this case, we say, well, the proxy needs to read the data because it's in a certain format. In this case, I'm expecting JSON data. Alternatively, you might be expecting XML data or some other perhaps more exotic form of data formatting. And the XJS framework comes with a number of these data readers, but they're very easy to extend into some custom flavor if you have a proprietary data format that you need to be consuming. Now we can look at the car model to get a sense of what the models look like in the XJS framework. So here we can see the Hello World model car class that we are defining. And this class simply extends the default ext data model, so it's going to inherit a lot of functionality, things like our getters and setters. And then we tell the definition what sorts of fields to expect. And in this case, I can say one of two things. I can either just provide an array of strings, maybe like the ID or the make, and let the model class figure out what type of data that is, and then handle that automatically. Or I can be more explicit and say, well, my car's model should be a string. Or in the case of a year, maybe it's going to be an integer. So you can save a little bit of overhead in the processing time by providing the actual types here, or you could just be lazy and just tell us what the names of the fields are. And so these names will be important when we get into our view. So when I look at my main view, you can see in the center region, so again, I took the existing starter application that had a tab panel, I got rid of the tab panel, and instead I'm using a grid panel. And I'm saying for the grid panel, the underlying data for this grid is going to come out of my cars store. And it's that easy to define there. And then I say to my grid, well, I'm expecting a certain number of columns. I have the text I want to define for the column header, so that would show up here, so make and model. And here's where things get interesting. You have the data index. So for each record in the store, which one of the fields gets mapped to this column. And so we can see for this one, it's make. If I look back at my data model, I can see, there's make, here's model. Model will be down here for this data index. And the only other thing I've done here then is to define a width for each of my columns. The first column I defined with a 200 pixel width. The second column I gave a flex, so that I say, well, depending on how many other columns, you can simply divide the remaining space horizontally by using a flex value. So alternatively, I could have said that here. I could have said I want this to be a flex of 2. And if I refresh the app, well then see the make column is now twice as wide as my model column. But I also didn't have to configure all of the underlying behavior for dragging and dropping the columns, for sorting the columns, for showing or hiding the columns. All of that functionality is built in out of the box with the XJS grid. And of course, there's a wide variety of other configuration options that you can use. So rather than spending lots and lots more time on the code, let me show you just a few more resources, and then we'll open up the presentation for some Q&A. So as I mentioned before, we have a series of online demos that showcase pretty well every widget in our framework, as well as other things like application architecture and demo apps, all sorts of other really cool things. So you can find those by going to docs.sencha.com/xjs/5.0. And additionally, the one demo you'll probably want to look at is our kitchen sink demo, because as you might expect, we dump everything in the framework into this demo to sort of show you what's there. You can also go to sencha.com/products/xjs, and under the resources section, you'll see a variety of white papers that we've written explaining the benefits of the XJS framework, how it compares to other frameworks like AngularJS or Bootstrap or Ember. And finally, on the Sencha blog, the link I have at the bottom there points to the original 5.0 release from back in May. But as I said, if you were to visit the Sencha blog as of this morning, we have a new blog post announcing 5.1. So we actually added a couple of new widgets, fixed a lot of bugs, tweaked performance again. So I would definitely encourage you to check that out. For those of you who have liked what you've heard so far today, I would encourage you to check out senchacon.com, because we have our annual developer conference coming up in April, which will be in Santa Clara, California. So please check that out. I believe we currently have an early bird special on pricing running, so try to make use of that while those tickets last. And finally, again, try XJS 5 for free. You get a 30-day free trial with every bit of our source code. So I would actively encourage you to go check that out. Whiting, do you want to tell me how we're handling Q&A here today?
Sure, yeah. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to speak up or type into the text in the chat area.
Let's see here. Let me stop my screen share and I'll check out the chat. Okay. All right, somebody asked tablet support versus mobile support, XJS 3 versus XJS 5 performance, as well as the upgrade. So let me start with the tablet support versus mobile support. And XJS 5 explicitly supports tablets based on the widget set that we have versus explicitly supporting phones. So what I mean by that is the XJS framework with its touch support will actually run on a phone. But phones are typically underpowered as devices, and because the screen sizes are much smaller compared to desktop and tablet, we found that our customers weren't necessarily asking for phone support. They were explicitly asking for tablet support. So you can develop an XJS 5 app that'll run just fine on your phone, but that's not really the approach that we've been asked to explicitly support, and so you won't find a lot of content around iPhone and Android phone development there. Next question was XJS 3 versus XJS 5 performance. So to offer some insight into the Sencha framework history, we went through a pretty significant rewrite of the framework in 2011, I think, when we released XJS 4. And prior to that, we didn't have support for things like MVC or MVVM. And we rewrote the framework to be more extendable and more scalable in that sense. And the trade-off in doing so was that performance decreased between XJS 3 and XJS 4. But in saying that, we still believe that the performance of XJS 5 is really quite good. Keeping in mind that we're a comprehensive framework, we're not trying to compete perhaps against native programming with Objective-C and Java. And I don't know that we've exceeded the performance we had in XJS 3 at the time, but as I said, we haven't heard much negative feedback about the current performance of the framework. And finally, the last question there was upgrading from XJS 3 to XJS 5. Because of the architectural differences in those frameworks, I would say that there really isn't much you can do to upgrade from XJS 3. There, the MVC and MVVM architecture, coupled with more than 4 or 5 years of API changes and bug fixes, I would expect that upgrade to be fairly difficult. In fact, you would probably just be better rewriting the application. But again, one of the business goals for XJS 5 was to prevent this from happening again. So in 2011, when we went through that upgrade, we heard it from our customers that the upgrade wasn't easy, and so we're committed to making sure that that upgrade process is smooth going forward. Other questions? So what are some of the startups or popular apps that are currently using XJS in production? So the nature of many of our customers, and I pointed this out earlier, saying that 60% of the Fortune 100 use our products. Many large companies use our products, and the nature of their business and the nature of our interaction with those customers is that most of their applications are not public facing. We've had a number of customers in the past use our products. I know there's an online accounting company called Xero that uses our products, or Nielsen uses our products quite a bit. But a lot of their applications are proprietary and internal, so they're not necessarily public facing. What I can tell you is to check out the Sencha blog, where we have a wide number of customer spotlights that highlight companies who want to talk about their experience using the Sencha frameworks. We'll have screenshots of those apps and explanations about why they chose us versus somebody else. So I'm going to encourage you to check out our blog for perhaps a more detailed answer on who is using XJS and how. For new beginners who'd like to build their first iPhone apps or games, would Sencha XJS be a good choice? So my advice here is sort of twofold. First, again, if you're focusing exclusively on developing for cellular phones or smartphones, the XJS framework may not be the best choice for you, simply because we are a comprehensive widget framework, and the odds of you building a large application to make use of the framework on a phone is probably pretty unlikely. And the same goes with game development. Sencha's not really a game development company. The XJS framework is based around HTML5, and so you might think that building an HTML5 game with our framework is possible, and you certainly could, but I'm not convinced it's the right tool for the job there. You might more easily check out gaming or physics libraries that are specifically intended for that purpose, or other visualization and drawing libraries that are more geared at that development practice. The best ways to use multiple themes for an app, that's a good question. So there are a couple of ways in which you can use themes. And I'm not entirely sure which direction you're heading with this question, but I'll try to answer it in two parts. First part would be some of our customers may rebrand an application for multiple of their own clients or customers, and so they want to use the Sencha command build process to simply tack on a different theme as they're building the application for a specific customer of theirs. And so you can do it that way via some of the build tools in Sencha command. But a different mechanism for using themes actually sits within, if you're trying to target one theme for tablets on iOS and a different theme for tablets on either Android or Windows Phone. And again, that ties into Sencha command in one small way, in that in your when you generate an application with Sencha command, you get a configuration file that's called app.json, and within there you can specify which platforms will receive which theme. And then we swap those out when the application first loads, and we do that automatically for you. So that's very easy to do as well. And in both cases, we have guides within our API docs explaining how to do that. So I hope that answers your question, Andy. Question: Facebook heavily invested in HTML5 a few years ago, then essentially pulled back and started building mobile apps natively. That was several years ago. What's my take on that decision and how the HTML5 cross-platform ecosystem is now? That's a great question. So back in, I think it was early 2012, Mark Zuckerberg came out and said that HTML5 wasn't ready. And Sencha, actually at that time, came out and said that we flatly disagree with that. And so again, this was, I think, either the summer of 2012 or the summer of 2013, I can't remember which. We created this app called Fastbook, and you can just do a Google search for Fastbook, and you'll see some of the content that we created, in which we rewrote the Facebook app and ran it on the iPhone at that time, and actually beat the performance of the Facebook web app. So Sencha's stance has always been that HTML5 is easily ready to provide the performance that developers expect and that users expect. Now, having said that, a few years ago, the tooling around building HTML5 apps wasn't as good as it is today. The devices weren't as powerful as they are today, and certainly the implementations of the HTML5 spec wasn't what it is today. The HTML5 spec from the W3C group was only just ratified a few weeks ago, I recall. So the ecosystem in HTML5 far better than it was then. But even then, Facebook's rationale for pulling back from HTML5, we believe, wasn't founded in truth. And I will defer for you to read our blog post and our video on Fastbook for a better explanation as to why. But Sencha's fully committed as a company to the HTML5 ecosystem, and every one of our products is either based on or supporting web development. So take that for how committed we are to the ecosystem. Somebody just posted the link to that blog post. Thank you.
Awesome. So do you have any questions for Art?
Don't be shy.
Yeah, so I guess doesn't seem to be any more questions. Art, do you have any final thoughts to conclude?
I think I've pretty well covered everything, and I certainly love the questions that were submitted. So if you have any other questions along the way, feel free to reach out to me directly, either through my website or on Twitter. In most cases, I'll probably point you to the Sencha forums so that you can ask a question there, and I can hopefully provide an answer in more than 140 characters. But in any case, I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I certainly thank you for your attention and the enthusiasm and the questions here. So, Whiting, thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, Arthur, thank you so much for the great time and the great presentation. And thank you, everyone, joining us live and also watching the live broadcast outside of the room as well. So thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate this. So this will be recorded, and our team will turn this into a blog post, and this will be released hopefully next week or the week after. So thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.